The Printer, written by Myron Olberg, illustrated by Henry Sorensen. My father was a printer. He wore a printer's four-cornered newspaper hat. Every day after work, he brought home the next day's paper. After reading it, he always folded a paper into a small hat and gently placed it on my head. I would not take off my newspaper hat until bedtime. My father was deaf. Though he could not hear, he felt through the soles of his shoes the pounding and rumbling of the giant printing presses that daily spat out the newspaper he helped create. As a boy, my father learned how to speak with his hands. As a man, he learned how to turn lead-type letters into words and sentences. My father loved being a printer. Sometimes my father felt sad about the way he was treated by his fellow workers who could hear. Because they couldn't talk to him with their hands, they seemed to ignore him. Years went by as my father and the hearing printers worked side by side. They never once exchanged a single thought. But my father did not lack friends. There were other printers at the plant who were deaf. They had also learned to talk with their hands. One day, while the giant presses ran, their noises shutting out all other sound, my father spotted a fire flickering in a far corner of the press room. The fire was spreading quickly, silently. Suddenly, the wood floor burst into flames. My father knew he had to tell everyone. He couldn't speak to shout out a warning. Even if he could, no one would hear him over the loud roar of the presses. But he could speak with his hands. He did not hesitate. He jumped onto an ink drum and waved his arms excitedly until, clear across the room, he caught the attention of a fellow printer who also couldn't hear a sound. My father's hands shouted through the terrible noise of the printing presses. "Fire! Fire! Tell everyone to get out! Tell the hearing ones!" His friends climbed onto a huge roll of newsprint. His fingers screamed to the other deaf workers. "Fire! Fire! Tell the hearing ones!" All the printers who couldn't hear ran to the fellow workers who could. They pointed to the fire, which had now spread to the wall next to the only exit. Not one of my father's friends left until everyone knew of the danger. My father was the last to escape. By the time everyone had fled, the fire, feeding on huge quantities of paper, had engulfed the enormous plant. The giant presses, some still spewing out burning sheets of newspaper, had fallen partly through the floor. Great shafts of flame shot out of the bursting windows. The printers stood in the street, broken glass at their feet. They embraced one another as the fire engines arrived. They were happy to be alive. My father stood alone, struck numb by the last image of the burning presses. The plant fire destroyed the printing presses. The plant had to close for repairs, but not one printer had been hurt. When the printing plant finally reopened, my father went back to the work he loved. The new presses were switched on and roared into life. When the day's newspaper had been printed, the presses shuddered to a stop. Now there was silence. In the midst of the stillness, my father's co-workers gathered around him. They presented him with a hat made of the freshly printed newspaper. As my father put the hat on his head, all the printers who could hear did something surprising. They told him thank you with their hands. That night, my father picked up the newspaper hat that his fellow printers had given him. After adjusting the four corners, he placed it gently on my head. I didn't take off my hat, but wore it carefully to bed. I imagined I was standing next to my father on a vast printing press floor, turning lead type letters into words and sentences. We were wearing four cornered newspaper hats. We were printers. The end. And there is the directions for making a newspaper print hat, and I will put that into Google Classroom for you.